Hello, and welcome to another episode of ReConnect. I'm Kilian Engler. Joining me today is David Gibson, our CMO. David, say hi.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks. Good. Happy to have you on today. We've got a pretty interesting topic to talk about. We're going to be covering really how automation can help in access governance, so controlling who has access to data, and how automation can be a huge benefit to that. And like all of our other ReConnect episodes, we're going to cover the hottest questions that we got from the live session. So, David, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. You have a couple things to set us up, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Sure. So data privilege has been a really interesting solution that we've offered for a long time. And I think what's interesting is when we get into the discussion of, well, how do you provision access? How do you review access? Traditionally, the approach has gone pretty much like this. It's like, well, somebody calls up the help desk, says, I need access to a folder, or I need you to create a folder. And the help desk says, well, all right, who does that folder belong to? Where is that? And the end user will say, well, I don't know, or maybe, ask my boss or something like that. And then, so they'll try to figure out who the folder belongs to so they can ask someone. Right. They'll get approval through email or phone. And then if they get approval, they'll try to grant permissions to the folder via either a group that's already on the folder, or sometimes they have to create a new group, or worst case, they add somebody directly to the ACL, which is kind of not a best practice. And then hopefully they document that practice for compliance reasons. So they have some kind of record, or they're just doing, best practices with change control. And, when we ask like, okay, end to end, how long of the IT person's time does that take? If you added it all up, usually about 30 minutes per request. And then if you kind of ask, well, how long does it take just from like when somebody requests access to when they actually get access? Sometimes it's days, sometimes it's weeks, you get varying answers. So this is something that, especially in the on-prem file stores, can be vastly improved with automation. And the benefits of automation and automating this, not just the provisioning process, but the attestation or entitlement review process is pretty huge. Nobody wants to be the middleman in terms of requesting access. It's not self-service, which is what a lot of people have gotten used to. So it reduces mistakes. Reduces the burden of IT, right? Because IT can really put the shares on rails and put that process on rails, and the end users just carry it out. It puts the decisions in the hands of the right people, which are the data owners or stewards or authorizers, different people call them different things. And they're the ones that are qualified to make decisions about who should have access to their data. Right. Also, if you can provide those owners some better information about the stuff they're granting access to or reviewing, like, is it sensitive? Any regulated data? They can make better decisions. Right. And this is really like a model to get to and sustain least privilege that's difficult to achieve in other ways. And you can even take it further. Organizations, once they get to this point where all data has an owner and they approve access, they revoke access, they review access, you can start to automate things like ethical walls, separation of duties. You can create automatic rules for, if you're in this department, you get access, or if you're in this group, or, different parameters, things like that. So it's a lot more efficient to set up this kind of automated access provisioning, access reviews. So the kind of next question, once people buy into, I really want self-service, how do I set this up, especially on some of these large data stores that are pretty uncontrolled? We have an operational plan that we've developed over a long time to get people in a position where they can automate this process. So that involves a first step, which is making sure that the permissions are in shape for a business person to manage.
Sure.
A lot of times when we come in, there's a lot of data that's open to everybody in the company.
Right.
So if you've got a folder that's open to everybody, there's really no sense in having a data owner manage it. It's kind of like,
Right.
yep, it's broken. I don't have any decisions to make. So there's some things that need to be cleaned up. Another thing that needs to be cleaned up is kind of the permission structure itself. The folders that need to be managed, what we find is, these need to be in shape so that when a data owner makes a decision, it doesn't affect things that it shouldn't affect, and the results are very predictable. And that generally means using single-purpose groups all the way down the tree. Right. So the one of the dangers that happens with these environments is that if somebody adds somebody to a group, it grants access to other things and nobody really keeps track of that. So what we found is, especially with collaborative data, is that if a group should only grant access to the hierarchy, and simplifying the number of folders that have different permissions underneath that base folder is very helpful. The simpler you can make it, the more easy it is for somebody that's not in IT to manage. So these are some of the things that we recommend is making sure that you have the permissions set up in a way that it's not open to everybody. It's open, it has a read group and a write group, and it populates down the tree. And the other thing is to kind of make sure that people have not too many things to make decisions about, right? If you had to do entitlement reviews for 300 folders every quarter, you'd probably be a little annoyed. So making sure that number is manageable for that owner or authorizer when you find them and assign them is an important part of the equation there. And then, of course, you have to do a little bit of training. It's a new system. It's a little bit like using online banking. And we've had a lot of feedback that once people have access to this, they're pretty delighted. They're revoking access far more often than they ever did prior to having this kind of self-service. They're using things like expiration dates on access. They're looking at how the data is being used and just generally in far more control than they were when this was very abstract or they had to go through IT to get these kinds of processes accomplished. So that's the idea of the show, is to try to walk through those steps in a little bit more detail, and make sure that we answer questions about it and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just if anybody's interested in watching it, the event is available on our webinars page. We'll put a link in the description below if you want to watch the full thing. We get into pretty detailed sort of technical bits and bobs of going through the process with you. So we'll make sure that we have that resource available if you want to learn a little bit more. But that was a great summary. Thank you for that, David.
My pleasure.
I was just waiting for you to talk about ethical walls. Like many years ago, I can still remember burned into my brain you quizzing me about data privilege and ethical walls, and I thought, this is finally the long con. I'm going to get David back on to talk about ethical walls.
It was your evil plan. Well done.
All along. Well, that's why I have the beard. This is like, the inverse universe. That's how you know.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this is, I think, the part of the show that a lot of people look forward to. We get a lot of awesome questions during the live events, and we wanted to give an opportunity to answer them again for more of the audience here too. So, David, I've gathered up all of the best questions that we got from the event, and I have them here. So I'm going to just go ahead and pepper you with questions. Are you strapped in? Are you ready?
I am. Let's go.
Awesome. Cool. So the first question, and I'm sure you've gotten this before, and probably a lot of people watching are probably thinking about this too, but how can data privilege be used with a zero trust initiative?
Sure. I think that's a really interesting thing. I think the end result is you can set up a micro perimeter around your data. The idea here is, you don't want 5 trust, 90 trust. You really
Sure.
want 0 trust. So only the people that should have access to the data have access to the data. So I think if you think about our whole process of making sure that there's data that is not open to the whole company,
Right.
And then you've got the right person responsible for it, then you can whittle down those group members so they're only the right people. And we call this a micro perimeter. There's actually a nice white paper
Cool.
about zero trust and Varonis that maybe we can put a link up to for people to download. I think that walks people through it really nicely.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Put that in the description too. So the next one up, and this is one that we've covered, but I wanted to just make sure that what is completely clear for the audience. So David, who is the typical user of data privilege? Someone from the business or someone from IT? Who would be the typical end user of it?
Yes. The idea is that IT can set up the framework. They can put the process on rails. And in theory, they would not have to do too much maintenance on the day-to-day once the owners are set up.
Sure.
And you've tuned it so that they can kind of only do what you want them to be able to do, right? So certain types of groups with different types of permissions and make different types of decisions. Now, what we have also seen is some organizations have a liaison to different departments, kind of somebody that's a little bit more technical, and they are a little bit provide a little bit of a service to use that as well, and make requests for them or do some of the reviews for them.
Right.
But either way works. I think the point is that the person that's responsible for the data is able to see and make decisions about the data.
Very cool. So this is a bit of kind of a follow-up question, an easy one. How easy is data privilege for end users to understand and adopt?
It's surprisingly easy. There is a lot to it, so it's good to have training. We do have some how-to videos that are available on our site. We also have let some customers download them if they want to kind of host them internally to make it easier for their users. And we want everybody to use it. But there's an interesting story. One of our customers was rolling out data privilege, and the administrator at the customer made a mistake and launched an email to hundreds of users by mistake, without training them, without really preparing them. Hey, this is coming, and, doing what their process was. And by and large, they loved it. They were able to really go in and they're like, hey, this is awesome. Great stuff, make decisions. It was intuitive enough so that they really were able to do it. And I think that kind of helped them breathe a, sigh of relief that it was easy enough. They didn't really have to worry so much about it. I definitely would recommend having the training going through the normal process, but it is easy enough that, people can take to it.
It's always nice to hear a story when a mysterious errant email doesn't end in disaster. This time it ended pretty good. So, look it up, right?
Exactly. Tragedy narrowly averted.
Right. So here's another easy one too, I think. But I think this is a question that we get asked a lot of times. So is there a way for data privilege to help data owners understand what data is stored in their folders or SharePoint when they're reviewing an access request or doing an entitlement review?
Yeah, keep the easy ones coming. Love those. Actually, one of the feature requests that we got a few years back and implemented was to put a label on the folder or on the object that you're reviewing to indicate whether there was sensitive data and what classification rule was matching. So one of our products, the data classification engine, inspects the contents of files, and we've got hundreds of built-in patterns to look for things like personal information, things that are subject to GDPR or CCPA, credit card information, health records, intellectual property, all sorts of different patterns. And so you'll be able to see, okay, what kind of information is in the folder that I'm about to grant access to or about to review.
Awesome. That definitely makes it much easier, again, going through that process.
Yeah.
So I do have a hard one for you, so I'm going to switch it up a little bit and going to throw you a curveball here. Okay, so this is one that I think I know the answer and it might be one of those "it depends" answers. So I don't want it to sway you too much. But one of the things that I've definitely heard over my career, and we've heard in these sessions, is how to get buy-in. So are there any tips or tricks to get buy-in from the business to start, for example, the automatic entitlement reviews or the access provisioning through data privilege? Because non-technical people, business folks, they don't like to take on IT things. It can be a little bit scary for them. So are there any tips or tricks that we can recommend to get that level of buy-in?
Sure. So a couple of the techniques that I've heard people use over the years is one is sort of give people the option.
Sure.
When people are calling up and requesting access via the help desk, that you train the help desk person to say, hey, you don't need me for this anymore. Help me help make it so that I can move on to do a more interesting job, right? And give them the option of the self-service, walk them through. That's I think a kind of a neat way to reduce friction and get people on there without building any kind of resistance or fighting that as well. The other thing that I think is important is just to paint the benefits. It's
sure.
Hey, the turnaround time doing it the old way was this. With this, it's like as fast as you can respond on the email. One of the kind of killer features of data privilege is being able to just hit reply to the email you get.
Right.
Say, yeah, I approve. Here's why. And boom, it's over. It's done. Whether this is an email distribution group, an Active Directory group, a folder, SharePoint site, you can kind of have this uniform process that's very low touch for the data owners. So I think, it's kind of like, how did they sell you on online banking? Or maybe are you still one of those people that goes to the branch? I don't know about you, but I kind of like the online stuff. So.
I keep all my money in, under my mattress.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. What's your address again, by the way?
Right.
When aren't you home?
We're home all the time now, David. Come on. Okay, cool. So this one I think is a bit of a no-brainer, but we do get asked, and it's worth mentioning again, kind of recovering. Does it make sense to clean up the stale or unused data prior to assigning data owners or managing the assets and data privilege?
Sure. And I love all these recovering questions.
Right.
Especially when I've had a hard night the night before. No, I think, the process where stale data comes in is in the repermissioning process and the ownership assignment. That's when I think people should ask the question. It's okay. Let's say that I unearthed a data owner, did some archaeology, and managed to find a data owner for these 5,000 folders that haven't been touched in 6 years. And so I can then clean up the permissions on those that nobody's using, and then assign an owner so that somebody can review access to data that has no business value. Or generates, at least, it's more risk than it's worth, really, at least keeping it accessible to a ton of people. So that's really where I think the stale data conversation comes in. Yes, absolutely, you can review access to stale data to your heart's content, but how much business value does that really provide?
Yeah, makes sense. And that's why I wanted to ask, because it's something worth covering because we get asked.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will add is for stale data, one process that's been useful for people is to kind of do a phased approach to getting it out of harm's way.
Right.
I've heard to kind of like put change the folder name, like append will be archived, in, and see if anybody else. And the next phase would be lock down the permissions, right? So that only administrators have access to it. See if anybody else then, was moved on, see if anybody comes looking for it, so you can kind of slowly reduce that footprint.
No, that makes a lot of sense. This is a more general question that we get asked, and it's something that's very important because it comes up often. Can data privilege manage security groups or folders or distribution lists, or what does that look like? Is it just about permissions, or what could we do with it?
So yes, I think I mentioned a little bit ago that you can manage Active Directory groups. You can
Yep.
actually manage local server groups, which is handy if you want to say, okay, this admin gets access to
Sure.
administrate the server over this weekend. It manages distribution lists as well as the actual file system permissions
Got it.
itself. Now, the file system permissions, we generally recommend putting in a read and a write group near the top of the hierarchy and having that flow uniformly down the tree to the best extent you can. And that minimizes the file system write operations, which can take a little time. Now, one nice thing about data privilege is our commit engine, the thing that actually makes the permissions changes, has become very, very sophisticated over the years. It's distributed, so you can put it very close in terms of network proximity to the nodes that you're managing. And that's really important when you're writing millions of ACLs.
Sure.
You don't want to do that over a WAN or where you're subject to latency, things like that. It's got a lot of error correction, built-in error detection. Some of those file system write operations can take a while, and so it's very important to do those cleanly. And the commit engine is able to do that. It's got a lot of rollback functionality, things like that with Automation Engine and Data Advantage. It's all the same commit engine that has become kind of a really important and powerful part of our solution.
Awesome. That's really great to know. I think the audience will like to hear that. This one's going to be a little bit more technical. We've talked about empowering the data owners and bringing the business into it. And I saw this question in the chat and I thought I have to ask this one. It's a really well thought out question. I mean, all of them are, but this one I thought was really interesting. So given that file system metadata can be untrustworthy, such as the owner being set to administrator, what's the best way to find a real data owner?
Great question. Yeah, if you go into and look at the creator owner setting, it's often administrator.
Sure.
And what we found is really the actual access activity is one of the most important clues.
Right.
We usually find a combination of the actual access activity, which is captured by Data Advantage, with some of the Active Directory metadata that is also captured by Data Advantage. Sure. So this might be department name or managed by, things like that. You can usually triangulate the data owner pretty easily if you have that information. Now, you also in that process uncover the stale data, which, as we talked about before, you may or may not want to manage and clean up. You may want to shortcut that to the dev null bin. So it's it's also, I think, an important point, that business owners don't always know what data you're talking about.
Sure.
They don't. It's like it's just their M drive or something. They don't necessarily know the path names or things like that. And there is some reluctance to be in charge of stuff. It's like that, like work for me. Why should I do it? So if you can present the proposed data owner with a list of folks that work for that data owner and say, look, all these folks work for you and they use this data. If you don't take control over it, I'm going to have to shut it down. Or, if you get the mandate to do something like that, then it becomes a more expedient conversation. It's my data.
Yep. Makes sense. Once we've gotten data managed, this one comes up fairly often that I hear from customers all the time too. Can you configure data privilege to have a multi-stage approval process before granting access to a group or resource?
Yes, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4 authorizers, as many authorizer levels, I think, as you want to, with multiple people in each level. So you could have, there's one of 5 people has to approve it to get to level 2. You could have 2 people, you could have, and on the next level, and then 1 person in the third. You can also have a 0 level, which is interesting, which essentially says no matter who you are, send it to the person's manager first. Right, we called that Authorizer 0, and I think we gave it a new, cooler name. Although I don't know what could be cooler than Authorizer 0.
Well, let's just not call it 0 logon because that would be bad.
No, that would be double plus on good. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, final 2 questions here. They're very related. So this is going to be a tough one. First question: does data privilege have an API?
Yes, it does. Very tough. I have found that customers who have like a ServiceNow or
Right.
some other kind of help desk system
Mhm.
would prefer to have a unified user
Yep.
experience when customers are requesting access.
Yeah.
So the API was designed to make that very simple. You can
Mhm.
do all the front end stuff through a different interface.
So you kind of answered my second question, but that's the other big one that I get. First is, do you have an API? And second, can we integrate it with other solutions like ServiceNow or RSA, IGNL, or other IAM tools? And I think I know your answer already.
Yes, we can.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to reiterate, because again, it's a huge question that we get asked all the time, and we want to make sure that people know we get that information out there.
Definitely.
Awesome. So we covered it already. It's worth giving a shout out one more time. David, where would somebody go to learn more about data privilege, maybe empower their users? Do we have any resources for that?
We sure do. We have obviously the Connect community.
Yep.
Has a lot of the how-tos that we mentioned. The Varonis website and the Varonis blog, and of course, if you're interested in discussing it, we're happy to just have a call. And
Absolutely.
we're doing executive briefing anytime.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, David. Thank you for joining me. This has been really interesting. It's been fun. I hope you enjoyed this as well.
I love your shirt.
It's a pretty good one, right? We'll have to get you one too.
I think we might.
There we go.
Thanks so much, Kilian.
Thanks so much. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this out on YouTube. If you did, maybe consider giving it a like or leave us a comment. We get some of those, and that makes our day. And we'll make sure to link to some of the other resources we mentioned, the original recorded webinar that we did, as well as some of the resources that David mentioned. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Take care.